Have you noticed that the food you eat today doesn't quite taste the way you remember from decades ago? That the vegetables you bring home from the store seem to lose their freshness after only a day or two, no matter how carefully you store them? You might assume this is simply your imagination, or perhaps the inevitable result of getting older. But there is something else happening, something that most people never consider. The food itself has changed, not just in how it is grown, but in what it contains, what it has lost during its long journey to your plate. And this loss, invisible as it may be, touches something far more important than flavor. It touches the very reason we eat these foods in the first place. You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. Living well across the years. A calm examination of health, food, and the spaces between. There comes a moment, often quietly and without announcement, when the body begins to speak in a different language. Perhaps it is a joint that aches after a night of restless sleep. Perhaps it is the realization that recovering from a minor illness takes longer than it once did. Or perhaps it is simply the recognition that the years are accumulating, and with them, a quiet curiosity about how to spend them well. This moment is not a crisis. It is an invitation to pay attention, to ask different questions, to consider not merely how to add years to life, but how to add life to years. The conversation about healthy aging has become crowded with urgency and alarm. Headlines warn of impending decline. Advertisements promise miraculous reversals. Products appear and disappear with the seasons, each claiming to hold the secret that all others have missed. Beneath this noise, however, there exists a quieter and more reliable body of knowledge. Observations accumulated across generations, patterns noticed by careful researchers, and principles that have guided human communities toward vitality long before the first supplement was ever bottled. This is not a guide to living forever. It is not a prescription or a protocol. It is an exploration of what thoughtful observers have noticed about the conditions under which people tend to thrive across the decades. It is an invitation to consider the spaces between the obvious, the relationships between food and place, between movement and mood, between the environment outside and the environment within. And it is, above all, a reassurance that the fundamental requirements for well-being are neither mysterious nor inaccessible. They are, in many ways, returning us to patterns that humans have known for thousands of years, now illuminated by the careful observations of modern science. The language of the body, understanding what changes and what does not. To speak sensibly about aging, one must first understand what aging actually is at the level of ordinary experience. It is not a single process, but many. Not a straight line, but a series of adjustments, compensations, and gradual shifts. The body that carried you through your 30s is not the same body that accompanies you into your 50s and 60s, and yet it is recognizably yours. Understanding this paradox, continuity within change, is the first step toward navigating the later decades with grace rather than resistance. Consider, for a moment, what happens to a leaf after it is picked. It continues to respire. It continues to undergo chemical changes. It does not simply cease to function the moment it is separated from its source of life, but the nature of its functioning changes. The compounds that gave it flavor and vibrancy begin, slowly, to transform. Some diminish. Others concentrate. The leaf becomes something different, though it remains, in name, the same leaf. The human body operates on a similar principle, though over a much longer timeline. The cells that make up your skin, your muscles, your organs are constantly renewing themselves, but the quality of that renewal shifts with the passing decades. The proteins that provide structure to your tissues undergo subtle modifications. The energy-producing centers within your cells become somewhat less efficient. The communication pathways between cells, once swift and clear, may occasionally transmit messages with less precision than they once did. These changes are not failures. They are not evidence of decay or decline in any moral sense. They are simply what happens when complex biological systems operate over time. A machine might be expected to run indefinitely with proper maintenance, but a living organism is not a machine. It is a process, a dynamic, responsive, adaptive process that changes in response to its environment, its history, and its use. What is remarkable is not that the body changes, but that it changes so slowly, and that it retains such remarkable capacity for adaptation even into advanced age. Muscle tissue, given appropriate stimulus, continues to strengthen well into the 9th decade of life. Cognitive function, in the absence of disease, remains largely intact, with certain forms of wisdom and pattern recognition actually improving with age. The body's ability to heal from injury, while diminished compared to youth, remains entirely adequate for most purposes. The key to understanding these capacities lies in recognizing that the body responds to what is asked of it. Muscles that are challenged remain stronger than muscles that are not. Cognitive abilities that are engaged remain sharper than those that are allowed to idle. The body systems are not static possessions, but dynamic responses to the conditions in which they find themselves. This is not a prescription for frantic activity or constant challenge. It is an observation about the nature of living tissue. It adapts to what is asked, and it atrophies what is ignored. The environment within. How what surrounds becomes what is inside. There is a tendency, particularly in modern industrial societies, to think of the body as a fortress, a contained entity with clear boundaries separating inside from outside. The skin is seen as a wall, the digestive system as a processing plant, the lungs as exchange mechanisms. What this perspective misses is the profound and continuous interchange between the organism and its environment. An interchange so constant and intimate that the very notion of separation becomes somewhat misleading. Every breath draws the outside world deep into the interior of the body. The air of your home, your workplace, your city does not remain outside until you consciously invite it in. It moves continuously across the delicate tissues of your lungs. And from there, its components enter the bloodstream directly, without filtration or selection. The quality of that air, its moisture, its temperature, the particles and compounds suspended within it, becomes, quite literally, a part of you. Every meal accomplishes a similar transformation. The plants that grew in soil somewhere, the animals that grazed on pastures somewhere, the water that fell as rain somewhere, all of these become, through the ordinary process of digestion and assimilation, the very substance of your body. The calcium in your bones was once calcium in soil, taken up by plant roots, consumed by an animal or eaten directly, and incorporated into your structure through processes so reliable that you never need to think about them. This observation carries implications that are both simple and profound. If what surrounds you becomes what is inside you, then the quality of your surroundings matters in ways that are not merely aesthetic or comfort-related. The air you breathe, the water you drink, the food you eat, these are not optional inputs, but constitutive materials. They become you. For those in the middle years and beyond, this recognition takes on particular significance. The body's systems for processing and eliminating unwanted substances remain functional, but may operate with somewhat less margin for error than they once did. The liver and kidneys, remarkable as they are in their capacity to filter and excrete, benefit from not being overwhelmed. The immune system, which must distinguish friend from foe among the constant stream of materials entering the body, operates more smoothly when the materials it encounters are recognizably within the range of what it evolved to handle. This is not an argument for retreating into a sterile bubble or for obsessing over every particle of exposure. It is simply an observation that the cumulative load of what the body must process matters, and that reducing unnecessary burdens on these systems is a form of kindness to the future self. The body that breathes clean air, drinks clean water, and eats food grown in conditions that respect its complexity is a body that has more resources available for maintenance, repair, and the ordinary business of living. The intelligence of plants. What grows where and why it matters. Plants, unlike animals, cannot move to find better conditions. A deer sensing drought can walk toward water. A bird feeling cold can fly south. A plant, rooted in place, must contend with whatever conditions its small patch of earth provides. This fundamental constraint has shaped the evolution of plants in ways that are deeply relevant to human nutrition. Unable to flee from threats, plants have developed chemical defenses. Unable to seek out nutrients, they have developed root systems that explore the soil with greater thoroughness than any animal could match. Unable to regulate their internal temperature through movement, they have developed compounds that protect their tissues from heat and cold. The result is that plants are chemical factories of extraordinary sophistication, producing thousands of compounds that serve purposes within the plant, but that also, when consumed by animals, exert effects within animal bodies. These compounds are not nutrients in the conventional sense. They are not proteins, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, or minerals. They are often classified as phytochemicals, plant chemicals, and they include the pigments that give fruits and vegetables their colors, the volatile compounds that give herbs their aromas, the sharp compounds that give certain greens their peppery bite. For much of the 20th century, nutritional science largely ignored these compounds, focusing instead on the macronutrients and vitamins that could be measured and quantified in relatively straightforward ways. More recent research has suggested that these phytochemicals may be profoundly important for human health, particularly as the body ages. The compounds that protect plant tissues from oxidative stress appear to offer similar protection to animal tissues. The compounds that give certain plants resistance to microbial attack appear to support the human immune system. The compounds that help plants adapt to environmental stress appear to help human cells adapt to similar challenges. This is not to suggest that plants are medicines in the conventional sense, or that consuming certain vegetables can treat or prevent specific diseases. It is simply to observe that the relationship between humans and plants is far more complex and interesting than the simple provision of calories and basic nutrients. When you eat a peppery watercress leaf, you are not merely consuming vitamins and minerals. You are consuming the entire evolutionary history of a plant that learned to protect itself, and in doing so, developed compounds that your body recognizes and can use. The implication for daily life is straightforward but worth stating clearly. Variety matters. Different plants produce different constellations of these compounds, and no single plant provides everything. The deep purple of certain herbs indicates the presence of anthocyanins, the same compounds that give berries their color. The sharp bite of certain greens indicates glucosinolates, compounds that have been associated with various aspects of cellular health. The aromatic complexity of fresh herbs reflects volatile oils that carry their own properties. Eating across this diversity, not merely consuming the same few vegetables week after week, but seeking out the full range of what grows, provides the body with a broader palette of these compounds than any single food could offer. This is not a matter of seeking out exotic or expensive ingredients. It is a matter of paying attention to what is available, what is in season, and what different plants have to offer. The fragility of freshness. Why time and distance matter. There is a reason why traditional cultures, before the advent of modern refrigeration and transportation, ate what grew nearby and what was in season. It was not merely convenience or necessity, though these certainly played their roles. It was also an implicit understanding that food harvested recently and consumed soon afterward simply tasted better and seemed to confer more vitality than food that had traveled or been stored. Modern research has confirmed that this intuition had a basis in fact. The compounds that give plants their flavor, the very compounds that make a just-picked tomato taste like a tomato, or a freshly harvested herb smell like itself, are often the same compounds that provide the health benefits discussed earlier. When flavor degrades, nutrition degrades alongside it. The peppery bite of watercress fades within hours of harvest, and with it fade the glucosinolates that give the plant its character. This degradation is not a simple matter of spoilage in the sense that food becomes unsafe to eat. It is a more subtle process, a gradual transformation in which complex molecules break down into simpler ones, and in which the delicate structures that give plant cells their integrity begin to collapse. A head of lettuce that has spent 10 days traveling from a California field to a grocery store in the Midwest may look perfectly acceptable. It may be crisp and free of visible blemishes. But at the molecular level, it is not the same food it was at harvest. The implications of this observation extend beyond the obvious recommendation to eat fresh food. They suggest that the entire system by which most Americans obtain their vegetables, a system built around centralized production in a few regions and long-distance distribution to the entire country, may be fundamentally limited in its ability to deliver optimal nutrition. The food that looks perfect on the shelf may be significantly diminished in the very compounds that matter most. This is not an argument against eating vegetables from the grocery store. It is simply a recognition that, all else being equal, food grown closer to where it is eaten has certain inherent advantages. It can be harvested later in its development, allowing more time for nutrient accumulation. It can be transported more quickly, reducing the window for degradation. It can arrive with more of its original complexity intact. For those in the middle years and beyond, this matters because the margin for error narrows somewhat as the body ages. The younger body, with its more robust repair systems and greater physiological reserve, can tolerate greater variability in nutrient intake without noticeable effect. The older body, operating with less reserve, may be more sensitive to these differences. Consistently consuming food that has retained more of its original nutritional complexity is a form of support for systems that are doing their best to maintain function across the decades. Water, the hidden constraint. Among the many resources required to grow food, water occupies a unique position. It is abundant in absolute terms. The planet is covered with it, but most of that water is salt water, unsuitable for agriculture. Fresh water, the kind that plants need, is far more limited, and its availability is increasingly uncertain in many parts of the world. The connection between water and human nutrition is usually invisible to the consumer. You see the finished vegetable in the store, not the thousands of gallons of water that went into producing it. You taste the leaf, not the rain or irrigation that made its growth possible. But the relationship is fundamental, and it has implications that reach far beyond the immediate question of whether a particular vegetable is available at a particular price. Conventional agriculture is extraordinarily water-intensive. A field of lettuce requires continuous irrigation throughout its growing cycle, with water either soaking into the ground, evaporating under the sun, or being transpired through the leaves of the plants. Much of this water never directly benefits the crop. It is simply lost to the system, unavailable for any other use. This matters because water scarcity is not a distant problem affecting only arid regions. It is a present reality in many of the places where America's food is grown. The western states, which produce the overwhelming majority of the nation's leafy greens and vegetables, are experiencing drought conditions that would have been considered catastrophic a generation ago. Groundwater aquifers, accumulated over thousands of years, are being depleted in decades. Rivers that once flowed year-round now run dry for portions of the year. The food system has so far absorbed these pressures without major disruption. But this cannot continue indefinitely. Water is not optional for plant growth. Without it, there is no crop. As water becomes scarcer and more expensive in the regions that currently produce most of America's vegetables, the cost of that produce will rise, and its availability may become less reliable. Alternative growing methods, particularly those that recirculate water rather than allowing it to run off or evaporate, offer a fundamentally different relationship to this resource. Systems that deliver water directly to plant roots and capture what is not used can reduce water consumption by more than 90% compared to conventional field agriculture. They can produce food in places where water is too scarce for traditional farming. They can operate independently of regional drought conditions. For the individual consumer, this matters in two ways. First, it suggests that the future of fresh food availability may depend on the adoption of growing methods that use water more efficiently. Second, it means that food grown in this way, even if it appears more expensive at first glance, may represent a more accurate reflection of the true cost of production in a water-constrained world. The artificially low price of conventionally grown produce depends, in part, on water that is being consumed faster than it can be replenished. The space between fields and cities, the geography of American food production has, for decades, followed a simple pattern. Grow food where land is cheap and climate is favorable, then ship it to where people actually live. This pattern made sense when fuel was inexpensive, when water was abundant, and when the environmental costs of transportation were not part of the calculation. It made less sense now. But the infrastructure built around it, the highways, the warehouses, the distribution networks, continues to shape what is possible. Urban areas, where most Americans live, are not designed for agriculture. They are dense, expensive, and covered with buildings and pavement. There is no room for traditional farms. And even if there were, the soil in most cities is contaminated with decades of industrial and automotive deposits. Growing food in cities, if it is to happen at all, requires a different approach. This is where the question of space becomes interesting. A traditional farm spreads horizontally across the landscape. A field of lettuce occupies a certain area, and that area determines how much can be grown. Double the area, double the production. This relationship is so fundamental that it is easy to assume it is the only possible relationship between space and food. But plants do not require horizontal space. They require access to light and nutrients. But these can be provided in configurations that stack plants vertically rather than spreading them horizontally. A single square foot of ground space, if equipped with multiple layers of growing surfaces and appropriate lighting, can produce what would require many square feet in a field. The relationship between footprint and yield is no longer fixed but variable, determined by how high you can stack and how efficiently you can deliver light to each layer. This shift from horizontal to vertical is not merely a technical curiosity. It fundamentally changes where food can be grown. A warehouse in an industrial neighborhood, a shipping container on a vacant lot, a basement in a commercial district. All of these become potential farm sites if the growing system does not require acres of land. Food production can move to where people actually live, rather than remaining concentrated in distant rural areas. For older adults, this matters in ways that may not be immediately obvious. As mobility gradually decreases with age, proximity becomes more important. A farmer's market 10 miles away might as well be 100 if driving becomes challenging. A grocery store with limited produce selection becomes the only option if there is no other source within walking distance or a short bus ride. Having food grown within the community, distributed through local channels, creates options that would not otherwise exist. There is also something less tangible but equally important about seeing food grown where you live. A head of lettuce that comes from a distant field is an abstraction. A head of lettuce grown in a facility you can visit, by people you might recognize, is a connection. It ties you to place in a way that anonymous produce cannot. For those who have lived in a community for decades, this connection matters. It is part of what makes a place feel like home. The problem of waste and what it reveals. The statistics on food waste in America are so large that they become difficult to comprehend. 40% of all food produced is never eaten. This means that nearly half of the land, water, labor, and energy that goes into growing food produces nothing of value. It is waste in the most literal sense, resources expended for no benefit. For fresh produce, the waste is particularly concentrated. Leafy greens, with their short shelf lives and delicate structures, are among the most frequently wasted foods. They spoil in transit. They wilt in warehouses. They are discarded by grocery stores when they begin to look tired. They are thrown away by households that bought them with good intentions but could not eat them before they degraded. This waste is not merely an economic inefficiency. It has environmental consequences that extend far beyond the produce section. Food rotting in landfills generates methane, a greenhouse gas many times more potent than carbon dioxide. The water that went into growing that wasted food is gone forever, having produced nothing. The emissions from transporting it across the country accomplished nothing except moving waste from one place to another. The conventional response to this problem focuses on consumer behavior: buy less, plan better, compost what you cannot eat. These are sensible suggestions, but they address only the final stage of a much longer chain. The waste that happens before food ever reaches a household is less visible but equally significant. Local production offers a different approach. When food is grown near where it will be eaten, harvest can be timed to actual demand. Rather than harvesting entire fields and hoping the market absorbs the output, growers can harvest specific quantities for specific orders. What remains in the growing system continues developing, gaining additional nutritional value until it is needed. The shelf life of locally produced food also tends to be longer, not because of any treatment, but simply because it has not been stressed by long-distance transport. A head of lettuce that was harvested yesterday and kept at consistent temperatures will remain fresh in a refrigerator for days longer than one that spent a week moving through the distribution system. This gives households more time to eat what they buy, reducing waste at the final stage. For older adults living alone or in pairs, this extended shelf life is particularly valuable. It is difficult to buy fresh produce in quantities appropriate for 1 or 2 people when that produce will only last a few days. The option to buy smaller quantities more frequently exists in some places, but not all. And frequent shopping becomes harder as mobility decreases. Produce that lasts longer creates more flexibility, more margin for the days when a trip to the store is not possible or convenient. The undiscovered vegetables. Walk through the produce section of any American supermarket, and you will see essentially the same selection regardless of where you are. Lettuce, spinach, perhaps arugula, broccoli, cauliflower, perhaps kale if the store is somewhat progressive. The selection is narrow, predictable, and shaped more by what ships well than by what might be worth eating. The full range of edible plants is vastly larger than what appears in these displays. Mustard greens of various types, each with different levels of pungency and different nutritional profiles. Asian greens with textures and flavors that bear little resemblance to standard lettuce. Hybrids that combine characteristics of familiar vegetables in unfamiliar ways. Herbs that are rarely seen fresh outside of specialty markets. Many of these plants are not obscure or difficult to grow. They simply do not travel well. or they are not familiar enough to justify space in the distribution system. A mustard green that will wilt within days of harvest cannot be grown in California and sold in New York. A hybrid that consumers do not recognize will sit on the shelf while people buy what they know. Local production changes this calculation. When food is grown nearby, the shipping durability of a particular variety matters less. It only needs to last long enough to reach local customers, not to cross the country. Unfamiliar varieties can be introduced gradually, with samples and education, because there is a direct connection between grower and eater. For older adults who grew up eating a wider variety of vegetables than are commonly available today, this expansion of options can be genuinely meaningful. The mustard greens that were part of family meals decades ago, now absent from supermarkets, may be available again. The particular variety of herb that carries childhood memories may reappear. Food is never just fuel, and the flavors that connect us to our past have value that cannot be quantified in nutritional terms. There is also the simple pleasure of discovery. At an age when many experiences are repetitions of things done before, encountering a genuinely new flavor is a small gift. A green that tastes like nothing you have tried before. A herb with a fragrance you cannot quite place. These are reminders that the world still holds surprises. That the familiar routines of daily life can still be interrupted by something fresh. Herbs as more than garnish. In the standard American approach to cooking, herbs occupy a marginal position. They are garnishes, optional additions, things to be sprinkled on top if you happen to have them. A parsley sprig adds color to a plate, but is often pushed aside. A few basil leaves might appear in a salad, but are not the point of the dish. Herbs are treated as decoration rather than substance. This marginalization is a relatively recent development in human history and is somewhat unusual cross-culturally. In many traditional cuisines, herbs are central rather than peripheral. Large handfuls of fresh herbs form the base of salads in Middle Eastern cooking. Herb purees and pastes are fundamental to Italian and French cuisine. Herbal teas are consumed for both pleasure and perceived health benefits across Asia. The nutritional profile of herbs supports this more central role. Because they are typically harvested at peak freshness and consumed without prolonged storage, herbs retain the volatile compounds that give them their character. These compounds, as discussed earlier, are often the same ones that provide benefits beyond basic nutrition. A diet that includes significant quantities of fresh herbs is consuming these compounds in concentrated form. For older adults, there is also a practical consideration. Herbs are relatively easy to grow, even in small spaces. A few pots on a balcony or windowsill can provide a continuous supply of fresh basil, mint, thyme, or oregano. The act of tending these plants, watering, harvesting, observing their growth, is itself a form of gentle engagement with the living world. And the flavor they add to meals can transform simple preparations into something worth sitting down for. The variety of herbs available extends far beyond the dried oregano and basil that populate most spice racks. Purple thyme, with its distinctive color and fragrance. Holy basil, with its peppery complexity. Lemon balm, with its bright citrus note. Each brings something different to the table, not merely in flavor, but in the constellation of compounds it contains. Rotating through different herbs over the course of a week or month provides broader exposure than sticking to the familiar few. Mushrooms and the other kingdom. Plants are not the only source of fresh, nutrient-dense food that can be grown locally. Mushrooms, which belong to an entirely different biological kingdom, offer their own unique contributions to the diet and can be cultivated in spaces that would not support plant growth. The difference between mushrooms and plants is fundamental. Plants photosynthesize. They use energy from sunlight to convert carbon dioxide into the compounds they need to grow. Mushrooms do not. They obtain their nutrients from the materials they grow on, breaking down complex organic matter and absorbing the components they need. This means they can be cultivated in darkness, on substrates that would not support plant life. The compounds found in mushrooms are correspondingly different from those found in plants. Beta-glucans, complex sugars that have been studied for their effects on immune function, are characteristic of many mushroom species. Ergothioneine, an amino acid derivative with antioxidant properties, is found almost exclusively in mushrooms and a few other fungi. Certain mushroom species contain compounds that have been investigated for their potential effects on nerve tissue. Lion's mane mushrooms, with their distinctive shaggy appearance, have attracted particular attention in recent years. The compounds they contain have been studied for their ability to support the production of nerve growth factor, a protein involved in the maintenance and organization of neurons. This research is preliminary and should not be interpreted as suggesting that lion's mane can prevent or treat any condition. But it does suggest that this mushroom, like many traditional foods, contains biologically active compounds whose effects are only beginning to be understood. Oyster mushrooms, both yellow and gray varieties, are more familiar culinary ingredients. They have a delicate texture and mild flavor that works well in a wide range of dishes. They also contain beta-glucans and other compounds that contribute to their nutritional profile. Unlike lion's mane, which remains somewhat unusual in American kitchens, oyster mushrooms can be incorporated into meals without requiring unfamiliar techniques or flavor combinations. For older adults, mushrooms offer several practical advantages. They are low in calories but high in flavor, making them useful for adding interest to meals without adding excessive energy. They are relatively easy to prepare, requiring nothing more than a quick cleaning and brief cooking. They pair well with many other foods, from eggs to grains to vegetables, and they can be grown locally, even in urban environments, providing another source of fresh food that does not need to travel long distances. The packaging paradox. There is no way to discuss modern food systems without confronting the question of packaging. Fresh produce, particularly delicate items like leafy greens and mushrooms, requires protection. Without it, they bruise, wilt, and become unappealing long before they would otherwise spoil. With it, they last longer, reach more people, and generate less waste at the household level. The problem is that the most effective packaging for fresh produce is plastic. Plastic clamshells and bags keep moisture in and contaminants out. They protect against crushing during transport. They allow consumers to see what they are buying. They are, from a purely functional perspective, nearly ideal. And they are, from an environmental perspective, deeply problematic. This creates a paradox that has no simple resolution. Plastic waste is real and damaging, but food waste is also real and damaging, and plastic packaging reduces food waste. Choosing between these two undesirable outcomes is not choosing between good and bad, but between different forms of harm. The optimal solution would be packaging that provides the protective benefits of plastic without its environmental persistence, materials that maintain freshness during transport and storage, but then break down harmlessly after use. Such materials exist in development, but are not yet widely available. Seaweed-based films, compostable plant polymers, and packaging grown from mushroom mycelium have all shown promise. They face challenges of cost, scalability, and performance that have not yet been fully resolved. They represent a direction rather than a destination. For the individual consumer, this paradox suggests a few practical considerations. Packaging that keeps food fresh enough to be eaten rather than discarded is serving a purpose, even if the packaging itself is imperfect. Reducing household food waste is a meaningful contribution, and packaging that supports this goal has value. Looking for opportunities to choose products with more sustainable packaging. when available, sends a signal to producers that these options matter. And advocating for better systems through purchasing choices, community engagement, or simply conversation helps create the conditions under which better options can emerge. The question of access. All of the observations about fresh food, local production, and nutritional quality become irrelevant if the food is not actually available to the people who might benefit from it. Access is not a secondary consideration, but a primary one, inseparable from any meaningful discussion of how people actually eat. Food access varies dramatically by neighborhood. Some communities have multiple supermarkets within easy reach, each offering extensive produce sections and a wide variety of fresh items. Others have few or no full-service grocery stores, relying instead on convenience stores and fast food outlets where fresh produce is scarce or non-existent. This disparity is not random but patterned, shaped by decades of investment and disinvestment, by transportation infrastructure and real estate economics, by decisions made in corporate boardrooms and government offices. For older adults, access challenges are compounded by mobility. The ability to travel to a store, carry groceries, and return home safely cannot be taken for granted. A store that is 2 miles away might as well be 20 if driving is no longer an option and public transportation is inadequate. The fresh food that exists in theory may be unattainable in practice. Local food production cannot solve all access problems, but it can address some of them. When food is grown within a community, distribution can be tailored to community needs. Farmers markets can locate in areas that grocery stores have abandoned. Mobile markets can bring produce to senior centers and affordable housing complexes. Surplus production can be directed to food assistance programs. The flexibility of local systems allows them to respond to local conditions in ways that national distribution networks cannot. There is also an educational dimension to access. Knowing that fresh food exists is not the same as knowing what to do with it. A vegetable that you have never seen before, that you do not know how to select or store or prepare, might as well be inedible. Cooking skills that were once passed from generation to generation have become less common, and many adults reaching their later years never learned to cook from scratch or have lost confidence in their abilities. Programs that teach food preparation, that demonstrate how to turn raw ingredients into meals, are as important as programs that provide the ingredients themselves. The pattern of daily life. Amid all these considerations of food systems, water use, and nutritional science, it is easy to lose sight of what actually matters. The pattern of daily life. The small choices that accumulate into weeks and months and years. No one lives at the level of statistics or abstractions. Everyone lives at the level of what they eat for breakfast, how they spend their morning, who they talk to, what they pay attention to. The observations gathered here, if they are to be useful, must translate into this ordinary territory. They must suggest not prescriptions, but possibilities, not rules, but recognitions. The person who understands that fresh herbs contain concentrated beneficial compounds might choose to add a handful to their salad. The person who understands that watercress loses its nutrition quickly after harvest might seek out locally grown versions when available. The person who understands that variety matters might experiment with a mustard green they have never tried. These are not heroic actions. They are not lifestyle overhauls or dramatic transformations. They are small adjustments, gentle shifts, incremental improvements. They are the kind of changes that can be sustained not because they require constant effort, but because they become, over time, simply the way things are done. The hand reaches for the herb because it is there, because it has become habitual, because the meal feels incomplete without it. The later years offer an opportunity for this kind of gentle refinement. The pressures that drive younger adults, career advancement, child rearing, social competition, have often diminished or disappeared. There is more space for attention, More time for the small pleasures. More freedom to eat what actually appeals rather than what is convenient or expected. The body that has carried you through decades deserves this attention. It deserves meals that are prepared with care. Ingredients that are chosen for quality rather than merely for price. Flavors that genuinely satisfy. The integration of knowledge. The various threads of this discussion: nutritional science, agricultural systems, environmental constraints, practical access, are not separate topics but aspects of a single reality. The food that reaches your plate is the endpoint of a long chain of decisions and conditions. The seed that was planted, the water that irrigated it, the distance it traveled, the time it spent in storage, the packaging that protected it, the store that sold it, the hands that prepared it, all of these shape what finally enters your body. Understanding this chain does not require mastering every detail. It simply requires awareness that the chain exists, that the food in front of you has a history, and that this history matters. The pepperiness of a watercress leaf is not merely a flavor, but an indicator of compounds that were present at harvest and have been degrading ever since. The crispness of a head of lettuce is not merely a texture, but evidence of how recently it was picked and how carefully it has been handled. The fragrance of a fresh herb is not merely a pleasure, but a sign that volatile compounds have been preserved. This awareness is not meant to induce anxiety or guilt. It is meant to inform appreciation, to deepen the satisfaction of a good meal by recognizing all that went into making it possible. The water that fell as rain or flowed through irrigation systems. The soil that provided minerals. The sunlight that drove photosynthesis. The hands that harvested. The vehicle that transported. The shelf that displayed. All of these converge to create this moment. This bite. This nourishment. For those in the later decades, this appreciation carries particular weight. You have lived long enough to know that nothing is guaranteed. That each meal is a gift. That the body's ability to taste and digest and transform food into life is not something to take for granted. The simple act of eating, done with awareness, becomes a form of gratitude, not to any particular entity, but to the vast interconnected system that makes human life possible. The quiet path forward. There is no single right way to approach the later years. There is no protocol that guarantees vitality. No formula that ensures well-being. The body is too complex. Life is too variable. And the future is too uncertain for any such certainty. What exists instead is a direction, a set of principles that have guided humans toward thriving across many cultures and many centuries. Eat food that is as close to its source as possible. Choose variety over repetition. Pay attention to what you consume. Not merely its nutrient content, but its quality, its freshness, its origin. Reduce unnecessary burdens on your body's systems by minimizing exposure to things it was not designed to handle. Stay engaged with the living world through food, through movement, through attention. Maintain connections to place and community. Adapt to changing circumstances with flexibility rather than resistance. These principles are not new. They are not discoveries of modern science, though modern science has provided reasons to trust them. They are observations accumulated across generations, patterns noticed by careful observers, wisdom that was old long before anyone thought to measure glucosinolates or study water use efficiency. They are the quiet knowledge of people who have lived well and paid attention. The years ahead will bring changes. They always do. The body will continue its gradual transformation. The world will present challenges and surprises. The familiar will sometimes fade, and the unfamiliar will sometimes appear. Through all of this, the basic requirements for well-being remain constant. Nourishing food, meaningful engagement, connection to others, attention to the present moment. These are not guarantees of happiness or health. They are simply the conditions under which humans have always had the best chance of thriving. The path forward is not a path at all, but an orientation, a way of moving through life that remains open to what comes while grounded in what matters. It is the orientation of someone who has learned, through decades of living, that the small things are actually the large things. That attention is a form of love. That each day offers opportunities for appreciation that are easy to miss and impossible to recover. It is the orientation of someone who understands that the goal is not to live forever, but to live fully, for as long as life lasts. The single most important understanding you can take from this exploration is this: the food that nourishes you is not merely fuel, but a connection to place, to season, to the careful hands that grew it, and to the ancient wisdom that knows freshness and vitality cannot be separated. If this reflection has sparked something in you, some recognition or curiosity about your own relationship with food, we would be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you would like to continue this journey with us, exploring the many dimensions of living well across the years, we invite you to browse the other videos in our library and to subscribe so that new wisdom finds its way to you when it appears. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.